the false sentiment of the I. How could the authentic sentiment of our being exist within us when the I's are feeling and thinking in our place? The gravest aspect of this tragedy is that we believe we are thinking and feeling, when in reality it is another entity that, at a given moment, thinks in our martyrized brain and feels in our sore heart. We will talk about the sentiment of oneself. It is worthwhile to reflect on the sentiment of ourselves and to understand profoundly what the false sentiment of the I is. Deep within our hearts, we all possess the sentiment of ourselves. Yet it is crucial to determine whether this sentiment is correct or mistaken. It is necessary to understand what the sentiment of the I truly is. First of all, it is urgent to recognize that people would readily give up alcohol, theater, smoking, parties, and other distractions, yet not their own sufferings. People adore their pains and sufferings. They would more easily renounce a moment of happiness than their suffering. Paradoxically, everyone complains about suffering and speaks against pain, yet when it is truly necessary to renounce it, they are unwilling to do so. We carry within us living photographs of ourselves, images from when we were 18, from adolescence, from 21, from 28 or 30, and so forth. Each of these psychological photographs is associated with an entire collection of sufferings. We even take pleasure in reviewing these photographs, recounting to others the pains of each period, the struggles we endured, and the hardships we overcame. There's a peculiar, almost bohemian delight in narrating our pains, in declaring ourselves people of experience, in telling stories of our youth, our struggles to earn a living, the most difficult periods of our lives. We find pleasure in recounting these hardships. When we tell such stories, we are enthusiastic bohemians. Instead of delighting in alcohol or smoke, we delight in the history itself, in what happened to us, in what was said to us, and in the way of life we lived. It is an exotic, almost absurd form of pleasure. Yet, we seem unwilling to relinquish our sufferings. These sufferings are the narcotics we enjoy, the indulgences we cling to. The more irregular and turbulent our lives have been, the more exotic and bohemian we feel. Something absurd, of course. Observe, however, that every event is tied to sentiment, a sentiment of the I, of the self, the feeling that we exist. At this moment, as you sit here listening and I speak, you feel that you are feeling. You have, in your heart, the sentiment of yourself. But can you be sure that this sentiment is correct? Naturally, you think it is. Yet the sentiment you have, the feeling of being alive, of existing, of living, might be a false sentiment. It is worth reflecting on this. At different stages of life, perhaps in bars, cabarets, or other settings, did we have a sentiment? Yes, we did. But was that sentiment correct? Each age has its own sentiment, the sentiment of being 18, of being 25, of being 30, 35, and so on. An elder will have yet another sentiment. Which one is correct? The sentiment of oneself is tremendous, because one feels, that one exists, that one lives, that one has a heart and says, I, yet the I's are many. Which one is exact? Reflect on this. It is worthwhile to comprehend this point. If one disintegrates an I, for example, the I of resentment toward someone, and one feels happy because it seems to have been eliminated, yet the sentiment remains, this indicates the work is incomplete. That I was not truly disintegrated because the sentiment of the I persists. If we forgive someone and even erase the pain that person caused, yet the same sentiment remains, this shows that we have not fully canceled that grievance, that bad memory, or that harmful action. The I of resentment remains alive. We are touching a very delicate point, for all of us are engaged in the work on ourselves. How many times have we believed that we disintegrated an I of vengeance, only to find the sentiment still present? This proves we have not achieved true disintegration. Within us, there are as many sentiments as there are psychic aggregates, or I's. If we have 10,000 psychic aggregates, we will have 10,000 sentiments. Each I carries its own sentiment. Therefore, a fundamental rule in the work on ourselves is to observe the sentiment itself. Intellectually, we might have annihilated the I of egoism, yet the sentiment of first me, second me, and third me could still persist. Let us be sincere with ourselves. If that sentiment remains, it is because the I of egoism still exists. Today, I invite you to comprehend the sentiment itself. It requires tremendous effort to make people take the decision to understand the necessity of disintegrating the ego, but it takes even more effort to make them understand what the sentiment is, which is usually so subtle, so thin. In this work on ourselves, my dear friends, there are 3 essential lines to comprehend. First, the work on ourselves with the intention of disintegrating the psychic aggregates we carry inside, the living personifications of our errors. Second, the work with others, learning to relate correctly to those around us. Third, to love the work itself, to work for the work's sake. If a person claims to be working on themselves, yet no observable change occurs, if the mistaken sentiment of the I persists and their relations with others remain the same, then it is clear that they have not truly changed. If they have not changed, they are not correctly working on themselves. That is obvious. Change is necessary. Yet if after a period of effort the sentiment of the I remains unchanged and behavior remains the same, can we honestly say that transformation has occurred? The answer is no. The purpose of these studies is change. Change must be radical, even to the point of losing our very identity. One day, for example, George may wish to see John, but John will no longer exist. He has lost himself. George may wonder what happened to him. John has disappeared. Indeed, even our identity must be lost to ourselves. We must become completely different beings. Among my students, I have observed some who have studied with me for many years, yet they remain unchanged. Their behavior is the same, and they make the same mistakes today as they did 20 years ago. This indicates no change, no novelty within them. How are they? They are as they were 10, 20, or 50 years ago. Change? None. If the person is the same as 10 years ago, they have neither changed nor progressed. They are wasting time, plainly. The objective of our studies is psychological transformation, to become different beings. If one remains the same, then their efforts are futile. I invite all of you to reflect on this. Do you truly want to change? If not, why gather here at all? Why dedicate your time to these studies? Reflection is essential. A guiding principle regarding the sentiment of the sentiment of the I, is always mistaken. It is never correct. We must distinguish the sentiment of the I from the sentiment of the being. The being is the being, and its reason for existing is itself. The sentiment of the being is always correct, while the sentiment of the I is false. Why do students delight in their psychological photographs from 20, 30, or 50 years ago? Each photograph corresponds to a distinct sentiment. The sentiment of the 18-year-old who got drunk, the 20-year-old with his girlfriend, or the young man engaged in perversion. None of these sentiments are correct. False is the sentiment of the young man who believes his handsome face will dominate the world. False is the sentiment of the 18-year-old who thinks all the world loves him. All such sentiments are false. Which sentiment is real? Only the consciousness can provide a true sentiment. Do not forget that the distance between the consciousness and the being is not great. Life has three aspects: the being, sat in Sanskrit, the consciousness, chit, and happiness, ananda. The real consciousness of the being, which is not far from the being itself, is trapped among the multiplicity of psychic aggregates which personify our errors and which we carry within ourselves. Only the consciousness can give a correct sentiment. This sentiment may seem harsh to others because they are trapped in false sentiments, unrelated to the authentic sentiment of the being. The sentiment of the objective real consciousness is what truly matters. To achieve this authentic sentiment, however, we must first disintegrate the psychic aggregates. As the different aggregates, living personifications of our defects, are disintegrated, the voice of the consciousness grows stronger. The sentiment of the being, that is, of the consciousness, is increasingly felt in intuitive form. In proportion as we feel the consciousness, we realize how the false sentiment of the I leads us into error. But this is extraordinarily delicate because in life, all of us have suffered greatly, that is obvious, and we have also followed mistaken paths, that is clear. In every aspect of our lives, in each moment, we have felt within our hearts something whose name is sentiment. We have always taken that something as the voice of our consciousness, as the sentiment of ourselves, as the real sentiment, and we have obeyed it as if it were the only guide along the straight path. But unfortunately, we have been mistaken, my dear friends. The proof of our error is that much later we have experienced other sentiments, absolutely different, totally different, and even later, yet other sentiments, again completely different. Then, which of them is the real one? We have been victims of self-deception. We have always confused the sentiment of the I with the sentiment of the being. We have always been led by self-deception, and there are no exceptions. I, too, walked the mistaken path when I believed that the sentiment of the I was the sentiment of the being. There are no exceptions. Each one of us has been a victim of self-deception. To reach the real sentiment, to attain the precise sentiment, is tremendous. That precise sentiment belongs to the superlative consciousness of the being. We must walk the path of the aristocracy of intelligence and nobility of spirit. As we walk this very difficult path of self-knowledge and moment-to-moment self-observation, we will learn to feel correctly, to know the authentic sentiment of the superlative consciousness of the being. What truly matters for all of us is the being, and sentiment plays a great role in the being's domain. How often have we believed we were doing well on life's path, guided by the living sentiment of an authentic reality, only to realize later that we were doing worse than before because the false sentiment of the I was leading us? Some people are unable to detach themselves from the false sentiment of the I. They possess countless psychological photographs of themselves that they would not give up for anything in the world, not even for all the treasures of the earth. They take pleasure in their pains and would rather endure them than renounce them. People live complaining and even enjoy their complaints, yet they would never relinquish their suffering. What I am saying may seem terrible, but it is the truth. Because of a false sentiment of the I, we can waste our entire existence. Time passes 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and we may reach 80 if we are fortunate, for many die before then. That false sentiment of the I, that false concept encloses us completely within the ego, and in the end, we die without having taken a single step forward. Normally, people do not receive the direct experiences of consciousness when confronted with the events of life. No, they are burdened with a host of prejudgments and preconceptions in the mind. Any new situation immediately triggers some preconceived notion. As a result, the experiences of life reach the consciousness indirectly. Because of the multiplicity of prejudgments and mistaken, contradictory sentiments we carry inside, the experiences never fully reach the consciousness, and consequently, we remain asleep throughout our entire lives. Consider a neurasthenic old man of 80 years, backward in thought, trapped by dogma. He has a totally mistaken sentiment of himself. When something affects him, it does not touch his consciousness. Everything reaches his mind, which is full of prejudgments, customs, and mechanical habits, and reacts according to its own conditioned state, violently, fearfully, or mechanically. Observe an old man of 80 and how he reacts. We already know him. He always reacts the same way. Why? Because everything reaches his mind, not his consciousness. The mind interprets the information in its own habitual way, judging everything according to its accustomed beliefs. The false sentiment of the I reinforces this erroneous way of thinking. Conclusion: whoever possesses a false sentiment of the I wastes their existence in a miserable way. It is necessary to reach the correct sentiment, but this belongs to the consciousness. No one can attain the correct sentiment without first disintegrating the psychological aggregates. As one disintegrates the psychic aggregates, the correct sentiment becomes clearer. When the destruction is total, the correct sentiment is also total. The correct sentiment of oneself is normally in conflict with the false sentiment of the I. The correct sentiment of the consciousness transcends any moral code, ethical law, or religious principle. Most moral concepts established by religions are, at their core, false. Because human consciousness is so asleep, humanity has invented various pedagogical, social, ethical, educational, and moral systems to try to walk the straight path. But all of this is ultimately ineffective. There is an ethic that belongs to the consciousness, but this ethic would appear immoral to the sanctimonious people of various religious organizations. In Oriental Tibet there exists a book, the Book of the Paravidyas, which contains an ethic that would not align with any religious cult because it belongs to the consciousness itself. I am not speaking against any religious form in particular, but rather against certain rigid structures, rusted frameworks, within which the consciousness, the mind, and the heart are trapped today, along with other outdated and degenerated structures of false conventional morality. It is against all of that I speak. In these studies, the main objective is not simply to follow or live according to petrified moral codes. What we must do is develop the capacity for comprehension. We must learn to judge ourselves constantly with the intention of knowing what we possess and what we lack. If we wish to walk the straight path, we must recognize that we have many things to eliminate and many things to achieve. Yet the mistaken sentiment of the I prevents many from advancing along the path of liberation. Always the false sentiment of the I is confused with the sentiment of the being. Any one of us can fail in this present existence as a result of that false sentiment of the I if we do not open our eyes. What truly counts is the being, but the being is profoundly deep. The being itself is the inner monad. Let us recall Leibniz and his famous monad. The monad is what the Hebrews would call neshama, that is to say, Atman Buddhi. Atman. Who is Atman? Atman is the intimus, the being. The book Atomic Gods says something about him. Before the false dawn appeared on the earth, those who survived the hurricane and the storm worshipped the intimus, and the heralds of the aurora appeared to them. Neshama is Atman Buddhi, the monad described by Leibniz in his monadic philosophy. Atman is the intimus. Buddhi is the spiritual soul, the superlative consciousness of the being. Together they form the monad, that is obvious. The monad unfolds itself into the human soul, the superior manas of the Orientalists. This human soul is, in the beginning, completely germinal. From it, through further unfolding, the essence appears. The essence is the only part of the human soul that the intellectual animals possess incarnated. But this essence is trapped within the various psychic aggregates that we carry within. In Hebrew, neshama is precisely Atman. Atman is its ineffable aspect. Buddhi is ruach. Generally, Atman Buddhi is called ruach. Net chi is the human or causal soul from which the essence originates. The essence, the part of consciousness that we have within, must be activated. Unfortunately, it is asleep, imprisoned within the inhuman psychic aggregates. We must understand that when one works upon oneself, entering the path of the consciousness revolution, one yearns to one day receive one's psychic and spiritual principles. In other words, one yearns to become a temple of the inner monad. It is evident that a developed, awakened essence eventually fuses with the human soul in the causal world. Much later comes the best part, the marriage, the integration of that human soul with the monad. When that union is achieved, the master attains total self-realization. Thus, the essence must be worked. We must begin by freeing it, by liberating it. The essence is a fraction of the human soul in every creature, and it must be awakened, for it sleeps within every one of the psychic aggregates. The essence possesses its own correct sentiment, absolutely distinct from a false sentiment of the I. That sentiment of the essence emanates from the authentic causal soul, the cosmic soul. Therefore, the sentiment of the essence is the same sentiment found in the spiritual soul, and the same sentiment that exists in the intimus or Atman. When one enters this path, one discovers that one has stepped onto the path of the consciousness revolution. And this revolution of consciousness is tremendous, for it is accompanied by the intellectual revolution and the physical revolution. The consciousness revolution brings with it extraordinary intellectual transformations, and as a result, the physical revolution appears. In alchemy, for example, there is talk of the reincredation of the physical body, about invulnerability and mutation. It is clear that the one who is fully awakened, the one who has attained illumination, can nourish himself from the tree of life. Consequently, his physical body, if he so desires, can become invulnerable and mutable, and this can only be accomplished through the alchemical reincredation. One who is illuminated knows very well how reincredation is achieved. Thus, there are three revolutions in one: the revolution of consciousness, accompanied by the intellectual revolution and the physical revolution. The great adepts of consciousness, those who have truly awakened, are illuminated. Many of them are immortals. Let us remember Sanat Kumara, the Ancient of Days, founder of the College of Initiates of the White Brotherhood, who brought his physical body to Earth from Venus. That great master, having long surpassed any necessity to remain in this world, has chosen to stay on Earth in order to assist those who tread the hard path that leads to final liberation. Sanat Kumara could, if he wished, submerge himself in the ocean of the great law. Yet he has renounced such a destiny in order to remain with us, out of love for us, in support of those who follow this path. We need to relate to our fellow human beings in the correct way. If we work on ourselves, we must raise the torch to illuminate the path for others, to show the way. That is what the Gnostic missionaries are doing, showing others the path of liberation. In the Orient, two kinds of beings on this path are mentioned. The first are called Sravakas, and the second Prachika Buddhas. They are ascetics who understand that the false sentiment of the I leads to failure. They have worked intensely on themselves. Some have even annihilated the ego, yet they do nothing for their fellow human beings. These Prachika Buddhas and Sravakas enjoy a certain illumination and some degree of happiness, but they have not become authentic bodhisattvas in the strict sense of the word. There are two classes of bodhisattvas, those who have the bodhicitta within themselves and those who do not. What do we understand by bodhicitta? based on the different renunciations and experiences accumulated through the worlds, and through the renunciation of every kind of happiness, they have worked for humanity. They possess the existential bodies of pure gold, for this is the Bodhisattva, the superior existential bodies of the being, formed by the wisdom that arises from experience through successive eternities. The Bodhisattva of a Buddha is a fully prepared bodhisattva, capable of carrying out all the works that the inner Buddha requires. Do you believe that a bodhisattva who has not developed himself in the living field of the Bodhisattva could truly progress in the work he must perform? Obviously not, because he is not properly prepared. Thus, Bodhisattva consists of all those experiences, all that knowledge acquired through the ages, the vehicles of pure gold, the evident wisdom of the universe. The Bodhisattva who possesses the Bodhisattva works through the different Mahamanvantras and ultimately becomes an omniscient being. Omniscience must be attained. It can never be received as a gift. It is the result of various cosmic manifestations and relentless renunciations. The Bodhisattva who has the Bodhisattva, that is, the sum of experiences, knowledge, the bodies of gold, and so on, would never allow himself to be led by the false sentiment of the I. Yet this false sentiment of the I can be frightfully subtle. There are individuals who have achieved great spiritual refinement and are still victims of this false sentiment. Understanding this is essential and fundamental in the great work. We all have the right to attain illumination, but we should not covet it. Instead of craving illumination, we must concern ourselves with the disintegration of the psychic aggregates we carry within. We must keep watch over that false sentiment of the I and annihilate it, for it can block us, deceive us, and make us think we are progressing well. It can even make us believe that it is the voice of the consciousness, when in reality, it is the voice of the ego. Understand clearly that one day you will have to create the Bodhisattva within yourselves, that is, to forge that experience and knowledge that result from the work on oneself. With that knowledge and experience, you will not fail. As you eliminate the psychic aggregates that give rise to the false sentiment of the I, you will eat the bread of wisdom, the supersubstantial bread that comes from above. Each time one disintegrates a psychic aggregate, one liberates a percentage of consciousness and, as a result, obtains a virtue, a new understanding, something extraordinary. Speaking of virtues, I must tell you that one who is unable to appreciate precious stones will not be able to recognize the value of virtues either. The value of these virtues is precious, but no virtue can be attained without first disintegrating its opposing defect. For example, we cannot attain the virtue of chastity without disintegrating the defect of lust. We cannot attain the virtue of meekness without eliminating resentment. We cannot attain the virtue of altruism without eliminating egoism. What truly matters is to understand the need to disintegrate defects. Only in this way will the precious stones of the virtues be born within us. The objective of this lecture has been to draw attention to the false sentiment of the I. You must learn to feel the consciousness, to develop a correct sentiment of the superior consciousness of the being, the superior consciousness that emanates from Atman, the ineffable, the intimus, the being. So, my dear brothers, this concludes our lecture. If anyone has a question related to the topic, you may ask freely. Venerable Master, does a relationship exist between sentiment and sensations? Sensations are simply sensations, and they may be positive or negative. Every sensation is the result of some external radiation or impression. For example, a sensation of pain arises because someone has caused it with a word or because we have made a mistake. Thus, we feel pain. And we feel a sensation of happiness when someone is kind to us or when we smell a delightful perfume. However, sensations are sensations, but sentiment takes root in the heart. It reaches the emotional center and should never be confused with the authentic sentiment of the being, of Atman, of the monad, of the essence, and so on. Each I has its own form of sentiment, and normally this false sentiment of the I leads us to failure. Another question everyone may ask. I do not want anyone left with doubts. Venerable Master, in each age that passes, do characteristic I's appear that are related to each age? Certainly, yes, according to the law of recurrence. If in a past existence we had a fight in a bar at the age of 30, the I of that fight remains in the depths of our being, waiting for the moment when we again reach the age of 30 in order to reappear. When that age arrives, this defect will look for a bar with the intention of finding the same person with whom it previously fought. The other person's defect will do the same, and both will meet in the bar and fight again. That is the law of recurrence. If at the age of 25 we had a love affair, Then, at the same age, the I that was waiting in the depths will rise to the surface, will control the intellect and the heart, and will go in search of the beloved of its dreams. She will do the same, and both will meet again in order to repeat the event. Thus, the human robot is programmed by the law of recurrence. But the being, the authentic being, does not express himself through the intellectual animal. He normally dwells in the Milky Way, moves within the Milky Way. What acts in this world is the robot, programmed by recurrence. There is a need to disintegrate the ego and awaken consciousness so that the monad, Atman Buddhi, the Ruach Elohim, who, as Moses said, moved upon the face of the waters at the beginning of the world, the King's Son, can naturally express himself within us, come into manifestation, and impregnate our human personality. Only he can do this. People believe they act, but they do nothing. They act according to the law of recurrence. They are programmed machines, that is all. Venerable Master, was the Second World War a recurrence of the first one? Everything is always repeated according to the law of recurrence. The Second World War was simply a repetition of the first, and the third will be a repetition of the second. Master, could you explain how it happens that one may believe a defect has been eliminated when in reality it has not? Yes. It can happen that one believes an ego has been eliminated, but if the sentiment of that I continues within us, then it has not been eliminated. This is a way to know whether a specific I has truly been disintegrated. It is a pattern that allows us to verify whether a certain psychic aggregate has been removed. Master, how can it be explained that the angel Adonai could have karma? Well, Adonai, the son of light and happiness, does not have karma. If at some point he took time to eliminate an undesirable element, that is something already past. Venerable Master, I understood that Adonai's karma was due to the remembrances of the soul. That is a conjecture. We must follow the facts. At least I have not been informed of such a thing. That is the plain reality. I understand that he has no karma. At present, he has a physical body and lives in Europe. He is a marvelous adept belonging to the conscious circle of solar humanity, working through the superior centers of the being. He lives anonymously in Europe, in France. Master, besides Santa Kamara, the Venerable Master, are there other Kamaras? A Kamara is understood to be any resurrected person. Anyone who resurrects becomes a Kamara. Obviously, the Kamaras, as well as the Pistis, are those who help create and give life to the physical human form we now have. It seems to me that the Avaswadas are more interesting than the Kamaras. They are the solar gods. The solar gods who govern the earth, and the humanity of the first race returned to the sun. They came from the sun and returned to it, and when the great sixth race appears, we will once again receive the visit of the solar gods. They will come from the sun and will live among humanity. They will establish the sixth root race on the face of the earth. They will govern nations and languages, and they rule among the 12 zodiacal constellations. The most important of these is Leo. The sun has its throne in Leo. The solar gods come periodically to the earth whenever a new race appears. But let us not stray from the subject we have been studying. We must bring to mind the need to study ourselves more deeply and to pay attention to the sentiment of the I. With this, I conclude my words. Inverential peace. Samael Aun Weor.